I explained to him, I said, feminism is not me against you. It is you and I against our girl child having a 1 in 3 chance of being SA'd before she gets to college. Right. And this in a full adult who had already been working on pink pilling was like something that helped crack it for him. Right. But I'm seeing these white women going, oh, these women haters are all against my son just because he's a young white man. Like, if that's the language you're approaching this with, then yes, your son is going to be red pilled. Right. You need to be approaching this with showing them. It only works to get the men on our side if we can show them that we are truly second-class citizens in this country and that they're the ones that can like wake up and affect that.
Now, I know, Daniela, with your experience as an intelligence officer, I would imagine you've been keenly aware of Russian propaganda and the influence over the American electorate going back, 30, 40, however many years. And in your unique background being someone in the cult, did you see, oh yeah, this is absolutely going to be a problem. This Russian propaganda, all the things that Felice and I have been talking about all morning, it's the demonization of it's othering people, it's the destabilization, demoralization. Could you see this sort of happening?
Yes.
Rampant sexism. That's one of the tenets of fascism.
Yes. Mm-hmm. But also just like this phrase will upset people, right? But kind of like the mediocre white male anger, the J.D. Vances of the world, if you will, right?
Yeah. And others. I mean, his cabinet, basically.
This is what Hillbilly Elegy did in 2017, was like explain to Blue America why middle-class white men were angry and voted for Trump. Right, so this has been going on for a long time. There's a really good book by Ijoma Oluo called Mediocre, The Dangerous Legacy of White Male America. And she's the author of So You Want to Talk About Race. And like, she's been talking about this. And so I have been, as you said, kind of like keenly aware. I also, in 2021, had the Army reach out to me to ask me to testify against my ex-husband of a decade prior, because he was advocating like violent white supremacy from inside the military as a high-ranking officer. And that's what Un-American is about, my video book, right? It was me looking back at like race and power and privilege and whiteness and otherness in America. And it, leads us right up until like the 2020 election when we were very divided. And so I had been noticing this since I was 19 years old with that guy. Like, why is he so angry, right? Like, why does he seem almost like a religious zealot? But it's, I didn't have the language to be like, it's politics. It's this narrative that's being told. But, what I think it is, what I talk about in Un-American is it's just like white men and to an extent white women are understanding that white supremacy is coming down and that patriarchy is coming down, right? Like these are the writing's on the wall, right? The cracks are there for enough people that we are soon going to be at a tipping point. And so they're freaking out, right? Because the lie of white supremacy is you can be this mediocre white man and just be on top as long as you uphold these systems and get a woman in your house that helps you uphold the systems. And I was fortunate that I woke up to this during my service in the Army and got out of that. But like, that's what's going on right now, right? It's like, it's not fair that these systems that worked for all of our ancestors now are failing for us.
I was mentioning the wages of whiteness. I was mentioning the wages of whiteness, like essentially the agreement of, hey, let the billionaires continue to rob you. And their agreement is, but I get privilege in society, right? I'll be a white man that fails up. I'll be pulled over less by the police. My skin color, I will enjoy privilege in society, unspoken privilege in society through systemic racism and by nature of just being a male. And when that goes away, it's like, when I was a teacher, I always explained it as a pie. There's a belief of white men in America that there's a finite of resources, it's a pie, and their piece of the pie is getting smaller, right? And as a teacher, I'm like, no, that's not how it works. You know, through innovation, through engineering, through thought, through creativity, like the pie can expand, right? But as they feel, you know, it's the dispossession of white America. Jared Taylor says it. They feel they're being dispossessed in real time.
Yeah. And I explain this from my cult perspective as like every cult has this like sacred assumption, right? This one belief. And the belief, the sacred assumption of America has been like whiteness
I'll be right back. Go ahead.
right? Whiteness is better in some way, shape, or form. And that's what like I'm really exploring in Un-American, which is it's a video book right now, but it's like my second memoir is like at some point, you know, when I got dropped in America from Latin America, where I'd spent most of my life, out of a cult, at some point I knew that like if I just turn myself into perfect blonde Barbie, like I can get myself out of being indigent and I can move forward. And then, you know, here I am in 2021, like becoming an expert on radicalization and extremism. And it's like, oh, that's the guy that I married. Like that's the track that I was on, that I think so many white women are on without even realizing it, obviously. But the sacred assumption, you know, like that's the thing you crack to like crack the brainwashing. And so I get asked on my channel a lot, well, why would you be against white supremacy if you're a white person? And I'm like, well, because the sacred assumption is a lie, right? Whiteness isn't better. Whiteness isn't sacred. And we're not better off, right? Like we might be better off in the hierarchy, but overall, we're not better off. Overall, as you said, like with technology and innovation and perspective, there's enough pie for everyone, you know?
Yeah, it's like it's like look where we're at now with Trump othering. The replacement theory is now mainstream. Trump has othered immigrants, but the reality is through immigration, through innovation of immigrants, right? That this is how America was built. It was not built on white supremacy, right? Like it was built on immigration and innovation, and the innovation, the blood, sweat, and tears of immigrants.
Yeah.
And so and it's so interesting how we can get away from that simple truth.
And, you know, the white supremacy, and this is like I say that you start studying cults and then you realize that like patriotism, white
me, and you've always been very clear in layman's terms, have been able to describe the reality that is the cult. You've made these direct comparisons. Where I'm still trying to understand now, because the fact that the MAGA verse has been so easily manipulated and convinced and is part of this Russian propaganda engine, what's the rebuttal? Like, how do we, because I feel like, and we've had this conversation before, and Felice and I were just talking about it, it doesn't matter. We could lead them to a concentration camp literally in Russia and they would say it doesn't exist. They would say it's not real. So what's our response? How do we push back?
I mean, it's, you made the World War II analogy there, and I think it's survive and resist. That's like the one thing you can do when you know you're being brainwashed, when you know you're in a cult. So in Uncultured, on my first day of basic training, I'm holding this duffel bag over my head, getting yelled at, and I'm like, oh, I just joined another cult. And so, like, you survive. You can't avoid all the programming, but you can resist. You can, like, sort of draw lines that you're not going to be pulled across, right? Like, for me, I tried very hard with racism and the racist ideology used in going to war. Like, I don't want to be pulled into that if you know you're being programmed. And then resist. This sounds so silly, but there's a good book I just ordered called Chromophobia, and like why we're afraid of color. And I think it's because we know inherently that like color can't be controlled. And I look back now and like this was one of my things in the military. Like I always had a hot pink wallet in my male uniform pocket, and the one thing they couldn't regulate was tennis shoes. And so I would wear hot pink tennis shoes. And I've seen other thinkers talking about like, this is the time you create art. You create art, you support art. And then the final thing I'm going to say is we need to go back to community, real community, like making community. I feel like white people have given up community for whiteness. So we're not going to get to lead this one. We're going to have to go, follow, Felicia or Felice?
Felice.
Felice. And we're going to have to follow Felice and let her teach us. And when things start to get bad, we're going to need
Felice. You better get busy.
We're going to need to do all of that off of technology also when things start to get bad, because technology is dangerous.
I was going to say, yeah. So tomorrow, you guys know Potty Mouth Pollyanna, Mandy.
Yeah. Love Polly.
Yeah, and myself, and then in bed with Danielle. She's a expert on women's bodily autonomy. She tours the world and talks about it. She's a PhD. We're starting a weekly show. The first one is tomorrow. It's going to be geared specifically towards the women's resistance and the effect of Trump administration and conservative policies on women. Like, I myself was raised by a malignant narcissist. I was having a hard time almost pre-election. It's interesting because the way I was raised, it was in complete chaos and the disruption, because that's what malignant narcissists try to do. They keep you on your back foot all the time. And it was like the minute we actually lost the election is the minute I got very focused. I thrive in chaos, right? And that's what, if there's one thing I know how to do, and I love your wording. It's resist a malignant narcissist. Like it was my full-time job when I was a little kid. So yeah, I think we need to provide places, safe landing spots. I think that's what this show will be. That's going to be every Tuesday. It's going to be 12 Central. Yeah, 1 p.m. Eastern. Sorry, my brain is not working. So is that 10 a.m. Pacific?
11.
Yeah, or 11 a.m. Pacific. Wait, 12
Mountain
Central.
Time, your time, yeah.
10, 10 Pacific, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, 10 Pacific, yeah, so 1 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, and I think that will be an opportunity and jump off point to have these conversations for women, to reach out to other women, because as women we do find these cracks. Women are going to be horrified what is happening, the dispossession of our power, the blatant disrespect, all of these things. I know Danielle has research teams tracking just the rise of hate since the election in the manosphere, the your body, my choice, the hashtag your body, my choice, the hashtag repeal the 19th Amendment. And it's going to be these microaggressions or overt aggressions at this point, I think that are going to shock some women, and those cracks are going to
Yeah.
appear. So for me, I think part of the resistance, and I think all women are looking for a way to be effective and to have these conversations. And so this is just the starting point. Fax and I have been having great conversations about how to create a network and be able to reach women. So yeah, like tomorrow, I think I'm going to host tomorrow. The three of us are going to rotate hosting, but yeah, it'll be every Tuesday. So I invite everyone to come, and hopefully Fax and I will be working together as well to build something out. We'd love to have you too, Danielle, if you want to guest and be there.
And let me
Yeah.
reemphasize the importance of stuff like Felice's show for white women. So the most powerful person to take down a cult or to get members out of a cult is the ex-members, right? So right now, like we need to go for that 52% of white women that voted for Trump. So when I was writing my book, Uncultured, I got a lot of rejections, and a lot of times they were like, I don't get it, right? And I would get frustrated, and then I would just tell myself, like, Daniela, you need to learn to tell it better. Right? Because the most powerful thing we're going to be able to do is talk about what worked for us, right? Like if you're a white woman in America, you have been in the cult of white supremacy. So what woke you up? What were those things? Right now is the time to learn to tell it better. Don't go get in fights over the holidays. Just like watch Felice's show, go find women, preferably women of color, doing this work and talking about stuff. Like right now is like the time to prepare for the resistance, right? So like learn to tell it better, because then as your friends, your family, your people are having their cracks in their brainwashing, you're going to be able to be that soft landing place, to be like, yes, I get it. Here are some resources. Here are some things that worked for me. Sort of like the way the neurodivergent community acts every time someone gets a late diagnosis, then everybody's like, hey, we get it. Come here. Let me give you all these resources, right? Like that's how we need to approach these people, even though their actions and their beliefs have had some very serious effects. But like the cult owns our country now. So we need to like be willing to give these like defectors, as it were, right? Like a place to land.
Yeah, I mean,
and I see it. I like to see it like they're leaving. White women are leaving an abusive relationship, right? Like they've been in a long-term sort of abusive relationship with the patriarchy, and you have to see it as a form of survival. And believe me, like I enjoy a lot of white privilege in society by the nature of my skin color. Like you know, my father's Black and indigenous Mexican, but I enjoy that white privilege, and I sit in a place of privilege, and I recognize it. So you know, I think there's a lot of frustration. I have frustration. Many Black women have way more frustration than I have, but we do have to see it like, hey, we can't wake people up any faster than they wake up. And when they do, you know, we've all been abused in one form or another. And like you said, we just want to have a place to say, hey, come over here. You know, here's a Discord. Here's resources. Here's information. And go get your crusty ass sons before they end up red pilled by Andrew Tate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite resources for waking someone up out of a cult is a book called Rising Out of Hatred by Eli Saslow. And it's about how these 4 college friends, 2 of them of color, I think, got like the heir to white nationalism to wake up. And they now, Adrian Black has just written another book called The Klansman's Son. I haven't read yet, but the Rising Out of Hatred one, it's good because it shows the 4-year kind of like painstakingly long process that these people go to, and absolutely didn't have to get people out. And I tell people to like evaluate your life. Like some people you're going to need to just cut out of your life to protect your peace and for your own like survival right now. But some people you maybe want to have that just like slow and steady approach with to get them to wake up.
Danielle,
and I saw
know-
someone in the comments say this. I just want to say this facts for you because I
for
think it's also important. I think women are at a place of frustration right now, but we do need to move towards a place of understanding and also welcome male allyship. You know, I do think that that's very important as well. Like I have this experience every day, you know, debating at nights on TikTok, debating MAGA men. And there are men who are in a place where they cannot listen to women speak. Like I am watching their brains shut down when they hear a women's voice. So male allyship is also important, you know, like it's not just about closing ranks and women go get women. We need men to have these conversations with men as well.
Look, this is so true. I always say that it took me like 7.5 years to like fully pink pill Mr. Knitting Cult Lady. But now he's a 6'2", white, blonde, blue-eyed, like billboard for feminism. You know, and he's so funny because he keeps saying like, oh, I can't wait for someone to come up to me and like say the angry things they say to me, right? And it's like, no, nobody's going to. You are in the body of the most privileged person in society. And so he now is a very good weapon. So that is like the reason, you know, the best way I've ever heard this explained is women couldn't vote themselves the right to vote, right? Like we have to convince
Good point.
the good men to take that up with their male friends. And that is one of the things that like the good men aren't quite doing in numbers yet, is like shutting patriarchy down with their friends. So
yeah, the locker room
you created
talk,
like a sleeper agent that has woken up in your husband. I love that. No, and it's like the
what
white
happens
dudes
when you
for
marry an
Harris.
intelligence officer?
I would love that list of everyone that logged onto that Zoom, the white dudes for Harris, because that's what men need to be doing, is organizing and having conversations with other men as well. And hopefully, Fax, you and I can work together to organize some of that.
Yeah, I've been on that mission for a while.
It's people like Facts doing stuff like this. So thank you. And I want to give you like credit for all the work you have done for the anti-cult side.
Appreciate that, Daniela. Thank you very much. One of the things that I think is really, really important that we probably don't talk about enough, and Felicia and I have had this conversation from an advertising, from a marketing perspective. Part of the power of the Russian propaganda that infiltrated American media was like these brief, easily remembered phrases like "lock her up," "fuck Joe Biden," "stop the steal," all this kind of stuff. And because the right-wing echo chamber dominates in that sphere, we've got Charlie Kirk and Joe Rogan, there's no pushback. So would you agree that it wasn't necessarily Democratic and or liberal messaging, but just not as many messengers?
It's not as many messengers. It's single channel, you know, like Trump has trained his people to watch Fox News through that being who he communicates with. And so I almost feel like the MAGA has one way to reach their side. And we are trying to message everybody, right? And we don't have like one way anymore, which is another thing about technology that has changed actually kind of in cults' favor since our last round with cults. You know, it's now you can be isolated in an echo chamber, but like still operating in the world. But like the only things you're taking in is from your computer screen in your bedroom. And it's all this one sort of thing. And about what you said, the chants, that's called loaded language. And that's like a weaponization of language that cults use. And, you know, say something like that and people just don't even think about it. But at the same time, some fuck Joe Biden, right, has so much more meaning to them. There's all this like vernacular going on in the background as well.
Right. I mean, they talk about some of the most successful marketing strategies throughout history, you know, just do it, you know, where's the beef, those kinds of things. It's all relevant. And I think you called out something that's really, really important. The right knows who their target is, white men, and then by assimilation, white women. Whereas on the left, because it's the good and bad of having a big tent, right? When you've got many different demographics represented under your tent, your messaging is not successful by targeting one group, one member within your community, which makes it a challenge. And like I've always said, we don't want to relent. We're never going to lose the moral argument because we're going to stand in defense of human rights. But to win elections in America, that's not even relevant anymore. I mean, human rights be damned. You know, I mean, price of eggs, gas, hate, BIPOC, attack immigrants. That's what's winning elections. So I don't know what the response is to that, other than there needs to be more people saying it, more groups like Police is establishing, more activism under White Dudes for Harris, that kind of shit.
Yeah, and I don't know who said this quote, but like the response in dark times is good people raising good children. And the way that cults end is when they fail to recruit or keep the next generation. And that's what I think is like a sign of hope here. I'm like, silver lining, there's a millennial in the White House. The only age demographics that went for Trump really were the boomers and higher, right? Like millennials just aren't in power yet. And yeah, young white men are going over there, but the women are the ones that bring the children, right? So if they're not getting young women and children, it doesn't matter how much money you have, Mormon church, it doesn't matter how much power you have, your cult is gonna end eventually, as many celibacy cults have found out. And that's really what happened with the Children of God, the cult that I grew up in too. So, the book I'm writing now is called The Culting of America. Okay, I think we've been on this path for a really long time. And I think like a lot of it is cracking up now. And like you said, it's not like wishing for failure, right, but it's just the way that systems change is either the people at the top agree to change them or the people rise up and like pull down the system and create a new system.
We've talked throughout this morning the parallels to 1930s Germany. We can sort of see it. The Lügenpresse, fake news. The demonization and the scapegoating of German and Russian Jews within society. So sadly, history repeating itself. My concern, there's many concerns, but because the Russian propaganda machine is so well funded, and the fact that it infiltrated American media and infiltrated the minds of the electorate, and it worked. It's only going to get worse, or in their minds, better, right? It's only going to be more intense. It's only going to be. So what should we be looking for aside from what we've seen already? Any thoughts on that? Again, put your intelligence officer hat on. You wear many hats, Daniela. You wear many, many hats. But this one now, the intelligence officer hat.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard because of technology. I think that at some point, Gen Z is pretty smart in like sort of moving against technology in some ways. But this is even like my one like thing that I'll really warn people is like when you are doing true resistance activities, right? Like do not use technology because we have the best spy network in the world. And that combined with, like you said, like outside Russians, like at this point we have oligarchs in our country, right? Which is a word that was resurrected for Russian kleptocrats controlling their country. And like we now have these billionaires and they're the ones that own the social media, right? And they're the ones that decide what you see. TikTok is owned by China, who's deciding what we see and what we're allowed to say, right? So
until Elon Musk buys it.
Right. But there needs to be like a lot of awareness about that. Right. Another thing to really, really watch out for is the whole point of a cult is to get your labor. And we already see Elon Musk now talking about the Department of whatever government efficiency that people are going to need to be willing to work 80 hours a day. I was already using his stuff at Twitter as the primary example for my chapter on that. Right. But it's like, watch your labor. I always tell people, like, watch your labor. What are you getting in return? I think it's excellent that millennials and Gen Z are kind of buying out of the concept that you just work for the man all your life and everything will be fine. And then, another thing to really watch out for is ends justifies the means thinking, right? That whatever is worth it if we don't, if we can beat the other guy, if we can beat the outsider. It's interesting
to watch them forego morality. Like, right, the Republican Party that is so deep is using religion as a control mechanism, and to watch that, like the line of them try to justify the lack of morality inside their party. I was watching Mike Johnson was being interviewed yesterday on Sunday morning political show. It might have been Jake Tapper who asked him, like, this is Mike Johnson, who allegedly is the Christian, the most evangelical of all the Christians.
Seven Mountains
like,
guy.
Does morality have a place anymore in the Republican Party? Does it matter if you are moral? And even Mike Johnson, this man who claims to be the most Christian of all the Christians, you know, has to do this tap dance to be like, well, Matt Gaetz is going to drain this, is going to shake up. Well, he's a child, you know, an alleged child sex
Predator.
trafficker is
Yeah.
really where we're at, you know, like that. I mean, so it's interesting to watch that disconnect, to watch them try to pretend they're somehow the party of morality while also letting, you know, essayers and criminals into the White House.
I mean, and this is kind of the exact story of the children of God, which supposedly was like, we're going to win the world for Jesus before the end time, and somehow ended up justifying the rape of children. And it kind of always does come to that because it's always about power, right? So it's just, I don't think that morality matters anymore in the cult. I think that, you know, again, we have to remember that like cults are built,
justify the means,
built on purpose in order to manipulate people and get power. And values are weaponized, right? The children of God weaponized love. Enron had honesty engraved in marble in front of their headquarters, you know, like values, Trump weaponizes loyalty, you know, so like values can be weaponized, values are gray. And I describe this in cults as like there's a sacred assumption, and the sacred assumption is always some version of we are right, right? And then they kind of picked, we're going to be pro-life, pro-morality, pro-family, right? As like their mission, right? Which is save the children. But under the sacred assumption of we're right, like we will justify anything. And this is where, again, my like intelligence thing for you is as soon as you consider yourselves the good guys, you're at risk, right? Like you're failing some sort of perspective. The whole heart of intelligence work is you have to divorce yourself from the unit, literally be agnostic, not believing in whether you're good or bad, and like put yourself in the head of these other people as humans so that you can understand like what they're doing to you and why. And so you can kind of like predict that, which is very interesting because then it's called the Cassandra effect. Nobody likes the person that always talks about the bad stuff. But you have to be able to do that if you're going to protect yourself, right? You have to be able to humanize the other side. And this is one of the things when we say cult members or when we say people are brainwashed, is we just immediately start like dehumanizing them in our heads. You know, I posted, this was a bad one for me on the left. Like there was a woman who got a silver star for shooting down that were raining down on civilians, and they happened to be in Israel. And so people were like, oh, should have just let it fall. And I'm like, this is ends justifies the means mentality, right? Like people are like, what side are you on? I'm like, I'm on the side of not dropping bombs on human beings. You know, like we need to be careful on the left as well about dehumanization, about loaded language, right? About like the way we refer to the other side, because that creates and justifies the means mentality.
One of the fascinating parts of this whole thing, and again, Danielle, I know I only have you for a few more minutes, so I appreciate your time, but the ability for the Russian propaganda machine to convince the American electorate that life would be better in Russia. What I mean by that is like the example that Tucker Carlson gave when he went on his, you know, I'm going to get on my knees, the filleting tour of Vladimir Putin, whatever the fuck you want to call it, going to Russian supermarkets, how clean they are. You know, look, you know, you can always find a place to park. You know, it's so, everything is so cheap. In that society that just has no regard for members of LGBTQIA, locks up the press, locks up dissidents. So the society that is not about freedom at all has convinced the American society who lives in freedom that their way of life is better. That to me is one of the most dangerous parts of this propaganda machine, because we see it all the time, the Putin apologists and the simps for the Russian society. Has that been gradual from what you've seen? Or Felice, I'm curious about both of you. I know, again, Danielle, you've been in this space for a while. It seems like I don't recall that ever happening. I mean, I think about 1980s, you know, war games movies, and Russia was the evil empire, and Ronald Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev to tear down that wall. When did this shift happen that all of a sudden a big chunk of the American electorate are on Team Russia?
I mean, I think a lot of it has happened with Trump and like the same stuff that allowed him to win. But like he's been worshiping Russia from the beginning, and I see this in my book, our cult guru, his heroes were Castro, Gaddafi, and Rasputin.
Wow.
And and it's like these obvious bad guys, but he was able to take Americans of the 60s and 70s and walk them into such a mindset. And I want to go back to what you said about like the Russian life versus the American life. Part of why cults pop up in times of social turmoil is because the world is like very confusing and very scary. And the cult leader just offers clarity, right? So white people in America were convinced to be afraid of like America not being a white country anymore. In part because they've made it so terrible for minorities, but in part because, and I always like to remind people, like the cult and the cult recruiters are manipulating you, right? Like this has been a message. This has been Russia didn't just randomly attack the elections in 2016. Like this has been going on forever, right? We'll let the Americans think they won the Cold War, sure. They don't know what we're doing. And that's part of it too. I just think American exceptionalism is so ingrained in us that we don't think this was honestly part of how we lost in Afghanistan, was just the completely underestimating people who had devoted their entire lives to coming for us, and thinking that we were somehow better because we're high tech, because we're America.
I like what you said about simplicity. I think like think about the solutions that Trump offers. Now they're lies, right? Like they're manipulations, it's disinformation and misinformation, but it is simple, right? Elect me, everything's going to be better. Don't worry. You know what I mean? Now imagine, what's the left's alternative? Hey, you might have to read some books. This is complicated. The answers are nuanced. The truth is nuanced, right? Like it's not an easy fix. It's actually going to take time. Now, which sounds better? I mean, it's true. I mean, Trump was raised by authoritarians. Like he was raised at the feet of them. I think that's how you, like you're saying, you end up loving Rasputin and Castro. I was just a great documentary. I think the fourth part just came out on HBO. It's called Breath of Fire. It's about the Kundalini, the Yogi Bhajan cult. Are you aware? And they bastardize Sikhism basically. This is a guy who's making everyone be vegetarian, who's eating McDonald's. Sound familiar? He's essaying children, like I mean, I suggest watching Breath of Fire because the parallels are uncanny.
And there's two things about what you were saying. One is anything in the space of personal transformation, right? People think of cults as religious. So like anything in the space of personal transformation, whether that is going to college, right? Religion, self-help, any of this guru stuff, right? Like predators can and will show up. And that's how so many people like get recruited in. But then the thing that you said about the like easy answer versus the complicated solution, that's a sign. That's a sign we can look for as we're in it and we can protect ourselves against. Like anyone giving you a simple solution for a complicated problem wants to con you or wants to cult you. Right? Like Elon Musk is not taking us to Mars when all of the world's best scientists can't build a functioning ecodome, right? A 19-year-old dropout from Stanford didn't invent amazing blood, testing technology when all the world's best scientists couldn't figure that out. Anyone, I have these lists of like the guru gotcha checklist and then my red flags for toxic groups. And at the top of both of them, I have a focus on your own uniqueness, right? Like anyone telling you that they are the way, the truth, the life, the only one talking about it, the only one that has this idea, right? Like Keith Raniere of Nexium just told his people he was the smartest man on earth and was a concert pianist. Gave no proof of either of these two things. He just told them that and they believed him, right? So it really is like question more. When it sounds too good to be true, it's not true, right? And just like, I know it's frustrating, right? Going back to like, if there was an easy way to get people out of cults, I would be very rich and people would like me much more, because the answer is like, no, we can predict it, we can narrate it, but like everyone's crack in the brainwashing is going to be different. And that's what's hard. And honestly, that is because we buy into our own indoctrination, which is why the discontent is so important. Right? Like all Russia had to do was wait until America was discontent enough, and then they can sneak in and be like, see how much better our life is.
Yeah, I mean,
aren't allowed to be discontent.
I think about it from the national security perspective too, because one of the Republican platforms this year was, firing woke Democrats in the military. The moderate, getting woke out of the military, and the fact that the right, the self-proclaimed party of active duty, party of patriotism, party of veterans, cheers for that. Again, that's destabilization. That's this demoralization. It's the woke people that serve in their country that can't possibly be tough enough, brave enough, courageous enough to defend us against enemy threats, right? So we've got to replace them. Meanwhile, recruiting's already down. So more Russian propaganda in the mind of the right, thinking that people who, just because their political affiliation, they might lean left, they can't be patriotic enough because Russia told us so.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, again, remember that like the control is always more important to the cult than the operational success. So that's the real danger here for like the American people, is that for better or for worse, there are a lot of people out there that want to get us, or I should say deserved or undeserved. There are a lot of people out there, and like, there's a very real chance that he will weaken the military, right? That he will, because building an army of yes men is not how America built the strongest military, right? It was diversity, it was inclusion of women and Black people back in the 60s when we first were able to mandate that desegregation, right? Like every single one of these things has led to the next one. Like when Trump tried to ban trans service members, it was active duty members that reacted very negatively to that. Because it's really hard to hate up close, right? So once something is being done, right? Like as soon as we got on those teams, those combat teams, which I believe was an experiment intended to fail, like intended to prove what they all knew, that women couldn't hack it. And then like as soon as we got there, it was, thank gosh you're here. We start noticing all these things. We start integrating more things. We learn that having women on the team makes everyone safer. All of these different things. But
could you speak a little more to that? Because, Pete Hegseth, our new underqualified sec dev, who paid off a woman that he apparently didn't grade. I mean,
yep.
Who knew?
That's quite a few.
Could you see, he wants women out of combat. He seems to be a misogynist. And you just said something very interesting to me, that you found out that actually having women on combat teams was beneficial. Can you speak a little more to that?
Yeah. So it's always been this assumption that like, We've always asked this question: are women good enough to be men? And like that's the question we've tried to make you answer for the first 243 years of like America, right? It was like, are you good enough to be men? Because if not, then you can't be a soldier. This is one of the big apocalypses I think we've had that people don't really realize, is like when the industrial age crashed into the information age, and I think we thought in the industrial age that everyone had to be the same part of a machine for a machine to run smoothly. What we find out in the information age is when everyone's a little different, that creates friction. Friction creates energy. We go farther, right? So like we have done well, right? Like we answered that question in 11 months that they had been discussing for 243 years. As soon as they like put us there. Actually, we answered it in 3 months. And then the generals were like, okay, women on all of the teams, right? Because the actual thing they found out was we're asking the wrong question, right? We're presupposing that men do war the best and that the way we do war is the best because we're at the top. But what we actually found out when we were forced to put women in combat because we were trying to win the hearts and minds of a Muslim population, that, men couldn't search women. So we were like, we should put women in combat. And we immediately proved like everything just completely the opposite. And that the reality here is that when both men and women are trying to unalive you, it makes sense to have both men and women on your side. But you have to have them at the table. You have to empower them to speak up. And all of that has been done very effectively in the military in the past 10 years, because people love to tell me the military is not your social playground. I'm like, actually, the military has always been the place where you can just force the policies. And as soon as I always say, like, when a group of people can't do something, you don't have to make regulations and legislations to ban them from doing it. And so as soon as you take those things away and you just let these people serve, then you start to see all of the things that their perspective brings to the table. So it's always been like, oh, can you pull a 300-pound man and all of his gear out of combat? But the reality is, maybe I can, maybe I can't, but I can fit through a much smaller hole than you can, Vax, to go open the gate for the whole army, right? Or they can just toss me over a wall, right? Or, as I said to the man who got in my face at my book event asking me if I could beat him like a man, and there were 3 generations of Air Force veterans at my back right away. It was like Pappy and Dad and Son. But what old Mike from Southwest didn't know was my stiletto was about 2 seconds away from going through the top of his foot, because I was going to beat him like a woman. So my answer to Pete Hogsworth is, I've been selling tons of books about being one of the first women in ground combat and all the things that we proved ever since he woke up and decided to say this. But also, if you wanna piss off 20% of Donald Trump's military and like really weaken, because women have been owning it in combat positions for the last decade. You're not just taking them out of operations and sending them back to support. No, they're going to leave in droves. And honestly, I kind of would under a, rapist in chief. As excited as I was that the military was going to get so much better under Kamala, I am, exactly the opposite under Trump and his man who has already been credibly accused of sexual assault. And, at least 1 in 3 of us, 44%, according to the to Wounded Warrior Program's last survey, it's guys like Pete that are doing it and that are now going to be in charge. But again, if they want to take away half of the perspective, like, knitting is Morse code, y'all. They don't even realize that. It really is. And there was very successful spies in World War II called the knitting spies. And the fact that like men will just consistently underestimate us is definitely like our strongest point. So I'm like, you know what? If you want to make Donald Trump's military weaker, I don't know, go right ahead, right? Like you're going to have to go against all of the evidence they've collected, qualitative and numbers, and just be like, nope, we just want to go back to being a man's playground. Like, okay, but one of the things that Hitler did wrong was expecting all the German women to stay home and just have white babies, and then discounting all of the women of the resistance.
Yeah, I think the 4B movement in America is going to become like the 64B movement in America. Danielle, this is great. I know you said you had about an hour. Felice, did you have any more questions for Daniela?
Just follow me, please, and hopefully you'll come on the show we do geared towards women, because I think you're an inspiration. I'd love to hear you speak. I think you bring a light, and sanity to a very dark time, and I've appreciated the conversation.
I agree, and I'm honored that you always spend some time with us. Any last thoughts for cautionary tales or anything for us to keep an eye on, or just in words of encouragement, positivity? What you got for us, friend? Take some water.
My biggest caution is isolation. Isolation always increases extremism. It's not surprising that we see extremism increasing after a pandemic. So make sure you're not isolated, right? Question yourself. Go to the little library in front of your house and grab a random book that you would never read. Make sure that you're getting more than one perspective and that you're getting information from more things than just what social media is feeding you, because that's how they control you the most, right? But as soon as they Children of God, the beginning of the end. Once they started using the internet as a tool to reach people, they also gave us that tool to the outside. Mormons are seeing that right now. Like, information is never bad. So read the banned books, read them to your kids, right? And just like, that's how you resist.
I love that. Would you like to plug your various books?
Yes. So I have a book called Uncultured. You can get that anywhere you buy books. If you buy it through the social media link or follow me and buy it at my shop, I autograph those. It's also on audio. The arts and cults editor of the New York Times said it was one of his favorite things of last year. And it was definitely the hardest thing I've ever done in 5 days. And then I also made a video book of Un-American, which is a second sort of memoir of me looking at power and privilege and whiteness and otherness and trying to understand how 20% of veterans were part of January 6th, et cetera. And you can get that on my Patreon, which is at Knitting Cult Lady. I also have a YouTube channel where I do a weekly show that's just like the cult report of the week. It's like the John Oliver show, but less funny and all about cults. So come and join me. And I'm every day on TikTok just talking about cults and the culting of America. And thank you so much for having me. And Felice, I'll very much like to be on your show and probably also have you come on my podcast, Cults and the Culting of America.
Danielle, it's always a pleasure, my friend.
Are you the same on YouTube? Are you the same on YouTube? Is it Knitting Cult Lady? Okay, awesome. Yeah. I'll make sure to follow you there too. Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure. It's so good to see you. Thank you. Be well. That was fascinating. So I think go ahead. Your thoughts on what we just went through there, because that was amazing.
I think she's a perfect example. And you know what I really like that she was talking about is that diversity makes us stronger. Like, not just our military, like women in combat, but also all races, all creeds, all religions. That's something that Mark Milley was talking about. Like, there's that famous clip when Matt Gaetz was trying to have a gotcha moment with Mark Milley at a congressional hearing and saying, oh, like, what do you know about Marxism? And he's like, I'm not a Marxist, right? But like, I educate myself. I need to understand Marxism. I need to understand white rage. I need to understand authoritarianism. I need to understand all of these things. I need to educate myself on a wide range of topics because my job is to protect Americans, and knowledge is power. You should want to do the same thing. Like, diversity makes America stronger. The collective makes America stronger. I think that was a beautiful note she ended on, because the more we isolate, the more we are individuals, the more we don't see the value in all of us, that, what I can bring to the table is not what someone else can bring to the table. And, we are stronger together. And when all voices are heard, that is the future. That is our way back to each other. I'm a Brene Brown fan, if any of you like, quantitative analysis and psychology. And she, it's empathy. It's being able to look at your neighbor, put yourself in their shoes and see their perspective, to empathize with each other, to have these crucial conversations. And that's America's way back to being whole.
It's true, and something just to piggyback on that, the whole the whole isolationism, and it's the lack of diversity that is in the Russian society. By they don't want diversity. They don't support the LGBTQA community. They certainly don't. They don't support the press. They don't support diverse opinions. They don't support opposition, obviously, and that propaganda has made its way to our shores. Similar, like we talked about many times this morning, it's the scapegoating, it's the targeting, it's the fake news, the Lugenpresse. It's like, the trans kids, trans athletes in sports, all that kind of stuff is all part of that propaganda machine, so that the dispossession of white people, so that becomes another talking point, right? Another pointed argument against diversity. Kamala Harris was a DEI hire. I mean, where do you think that comes from? That comes from this, the preservation of whiteness.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I could not agree. Yeah. And we could talk about that in a second. But I so agree with what you're saying. And I think that's why it's important. Like, what I think we can do on social media, and it's like, what can we all do? It's, you can be yourself and you can tell your story, right? We need to humanize ourselves, right, to the right, right? Like as a pansexual woman, I can explain what that is, or I consider myself a sapiosexual. Like, yeah, hey, I
Me
don't
too.
love people based on what type of genitals they have, right? Like that's the last thing I think about. I just love people's brains, I'm interested in, I fall in love with people's minds. But the more we humanize ourselves, the more we say, this is who I am. I'm just a person like you. Get to know me, learn about me, see me as a human. Like, we need to force the right to see us as humans just like they are. We are your neighbors. We're just trying to survive in a capitalistic society like you. So I think it's those conversations, it's community. The more we isolate, the more we don't connect with people, the worse the problem becomes.
Yeah, and I think Daniela's message, and maybe if you heard differently, let me know, Felice. But when I asked her about how do we combat this, right? It's not easy. It's obviously not easy. It's an uphill fight when we take these truncated. What did she call the three? What did she call that? I forgot what she said. That loaded messaging or something to that effect, right? I forgot what she called it.
Loaded. Oh, I can't
Something
remember
like that.
either.
But the three word, the campaigns again, where's the beef? Lock her up. Just do it from Nike. Stop the steal. Fuck Joe Biden. All those kinds of things by design. That is a strategy that comes from misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda because it's loaded language. Thank you, John. That's by design. So for us to retort or rebut that, what is it? Human rights matters. Of course, human rights matters. Or defend women's rights. Of course, we're going to defend women's rights. It doesn't land the same because it's not rooted in anger. It's not rooted in hatred. It's not an attack on someone. So I think what I learned from that conversation again was brilliant. Danielle's book on culture, by the way, there's a link to it in the link tree in my bio. If you buy it through that, you'll get an autographed copy from her. Was the simplicity of the messaging from the right and how it's been so simple, but yet a tried and true method. You can compare it to Yahtzee Germany through, the Crystal Knight going after the marginalized groups, much like this mass deportation. We just got examples of Trump literally saying, oh yeah, day one, we're going to go after people. So community, we all have to stick together. It's that simple. Everybody, please keep liking and sharing. Please let's get Felice up over 5K coins, please. I would like to encourage folks to subscribe. If you subscribe to our channel, first of all, to join our Discord, this does not require a subscription. Come on in, join the party. It's great. Subscriber benefits include access to the subscribers only section of our Discord, which gives you not only opportunities for streaming events, for subscriber specials, but you can also get discount on some merch. And we have brand new holiday themed merch. My new favorite merch item is the Regulate Dick, Not Jane. That is available in our merch store.
I have to Andrea, thank you so much for the Venmo. And it says, my name is Carrie. Tell everyone I said to gift you. Thank you for all you do. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Like, we do rely on tips and donations, like to keep my research going, all of the stuff I do. Again, I just want to say, if you're interested in that shit, I do a clip show every day. It starts at 11 Pacific.
Do you sleep?
Eastern.
Do you sleep at all?
No, I know I don't. I know the debate at night. Yeah, 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern with Pickles. If you know Pickles, we also debate together sometimes at nights. And then tomorrow, Tuesdays, will be the day when Potty Mouth Pollyanna and Mandy and In Bed with Danielle, Danny and I will be starting our show. The inaugural show will be tomorrow. And then, like we said, we should build a community. And I think we should also say, if there's people who have backgrounds in advertising and marketing, like, we need to do a good old fashioned, like, Mad Men creative sesh. Like, these 3-syllable slogans, you know what I mean? We can make them. We should have different messaging topics and put these out and brand the shit out of them. Sorry.
Yeah, you can say shit. It's okay. You're fine. Something else that Felice and I have been talking about, and I thank you for mentioning that, is that, again, we touched on this a little bit with Daniela, there's not enough outlets on the left to kind of push back. So we feel and I've gone back and forth, and I don't necessarily think it was the DNC and or left-leaning messaging. I just think it's the lack of messengers. And there's a bit of pearl clutching on the left for sure that's been going on forever, but I think it's a good and bad. When you have a big tent, when you have a lot of people in your universe, there's a lot of people's opinions and voices that you're going to hear, and that's a really, really good thing. But to message them directly is difficult because you're going to miss some, which is, again, this goes back to the propaganda machine that the Russians were able to tap into. White boy rage in particular, blue collar workers who, again, used to be a core demographic within the Democratic Party, and they said whatever that messaging might be, it's the immigrants are coming for your job, blame the left for inflation, trans kids in schools are indoctrinating your children, which of course we know is just not true, but it worked, and it's hard to come back from that ledge, Felice.
Oh, I know. And that is one of the issues is like once you walk through a door, it's really hard to go backwards. And that is like Danny, Mandy and I were having a conversation yesterday, and it's like, yeah, we're going to feel the effects of electing Trump probably for the rest of our natural lives, and our children will. It's like, once you ring a bell, how do you unring it?
Pavlov, exactly. Hi, John. Thanks for your patience. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Fax, Felice. Firstly, well, I'm demoralised, like we all are, of course, with the result. But I wanted to talk about a couple of things because I've also been concerned with, I guess, the lack of analysis about power. And I come from a background of having run a design agency at a high level doing corporate identities and corporate identity rollouts for a couple of decades. To give you some idea, when I develop a logo, I've got 274 points of comparison I use to compare logos. So people just see little symbols, but there's actually a great deal of depth of analysis if you're going to do it competitively. And part of the concern I had in reaching out to people in the DNC, as I had for probably 12 months beforehand, was just a misunderstanding completely of what I feel was happening in terms of the marketing on the MAGA side and in terms of their message. Because look, all the things about Russian propaganda, the misinformation and, the prejudice and the rest, all of that's true, but that's not what was happening. And it's also not what progressives need to do if we need to understand what was really happening if we're going to win. Because in order to win, we have to manipulate power. Okay, it's about power. And what Trump did was a classic study in power. And if you'll allow me, I'll just give you a couple of rundowns. The DNC is still campaigning like it's 2010. Trump is running a campaign, or ran a campaign. It was actually his narrative and the way that he, if you like, conveyed that narrative, which was one of the innovative transformations of the last election. And what did he do specifically? Well, specifically what he did was, and I think the debate was really instrumental because everyone who looked at traditional politics said Kamala won the debate, right? She won it because she had the talking point, she got over the top of him, she ruffled him and so on. He came away saying he won the debate, and everyone said, oh, he's just saying that to gaslight us all, to try to play to his base. But he did win the debate. You know why? Because for 2 weeks we were talking about cats and dogs and them being eaten. Right, that was the truth of it. He controlled the narrative for 2 weeks. And what was he really doing? He was running a TV show. And his television show was effectively a three-way combination of The Apprentice meets the World Wrestling Federation meets Jerry Springer. Okay, a reality TV show version of that. And all he had to do was release a new episode every week or two, and he would run on that episode. Now, in terms of the character that he plays, because let's be clear about this, we all know that he's smarter than he makes out, because you don't get to do what he's done if you're not smart. Okay, I'm sorry to say. Dumb people can't do what he's done. Okay, now, is he a stable genius and all that? Well, this is a caricature. And what's the character that he's playing? Well, it's a combination of the baby face or the hero from World Wrestling Federation and also the heel. But in fact, what he's really done is create a character much like Walter White in Breaking Bad. If you think about Breaking Bad, right, and Walter White, I don't know if Felice, you saw that.
The sympathetic villain. Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Well, and more than that.
Vince McMahon.
Well, I actually think more Walter White, because Walter White did the most abhorrent things, and yet we could still feel some empathy for him because of the way that he'd come to that story. And Trump's underlying narrative, if you like, was the whole the country's not delivering for enough people. That was the good guy part of what he was putting. And so then all the villainy that he then participates in is forgiven by his base and by people who are swing voters as not being real. Oh, he's only, it's theatrical and all the rest, because in large part it is. My biggest concern about what's going to happen with MAGA isn't the extremes of MAGA, I've got to say. It's a Ronald Reagan revolution, because you know what happened last time was Reagan got in, and then 12 years later they'd transformed America into a neoliberal arrangement, completely taking it away from the tax arrangements that were happening from World War II to when Reagan got in. What I'm concerned about here is that when you put people like Elon Musk in charge of things, when he can, it's quite a feat to do the things that he's done in business. Now, what happens when they deliver outcomes that actually make everyone very happy? What if they're as efficient as what the fascists were in Germany in terms of delivering things to people? What if the oligarchs actually come along with their products and services and their money, and they deliver results for people on the ground, and people go, I really like some of this stuff, I'm going to keep voting for it. Because the last
society.
Right, and the last time it happened, the Democrats ceded that ground, and they became essentially neoliberals as well. We're just a little bit nicer. We're still going to do NAFTA. We're still going to deregulate the banks, which ended up causing the 2008 crisis when Clinton did it. We're still going to do all those things that were traditionally Republican because Reagan pushed us so far to the right. We're scared to actually fight and stand up to them. So we're going to roll over on that stuff and just be nicer.
Yeah,
right?
John, you bring up a lot of really good points. I mean, I think that there's so many examples of how. So we can, since you brought, I'm going to drop you down, John. I've got some other people requesting. Thanks for being here.
Can I just make one last point?
Sure.
One of the things that I think you'll see in the first 6 to 12 months is going to be Elon Musk.
Plane, brother.
Elon Musk deregulating the car industry to allow automated driving for all the vehicles. And so when you've got a whole fleet of cars picking up old people, picking up kids and dropping them off without drivers, there's going to be a lot of people who get in those cars and say, that's actually a really good thing that's going on. When they do things like that, that's a real issue. We're not even talking about those sorts of potentials.
Well, thanks a lot, John, for being here today, brother. I appreciate you. He did bring up something that reminds me of like the Christian nationalism, again, back to messaging and propaganda and how it infiltrates our society. So we think about Reagan and the evangelicals. They feel like they were losing traffic. They feel like they were losing ground with their messaging. So instead of using their attempt to have Christian nationalism take over our government, they needed a target. So they used abortion rights. So they used Roe. So they've been building this resistance to Roe for 50 years because they would have never been able to sell to their electorate that our real goal is Christian nationalism. And that's the same thing that happened in Germany. It's the exact same thing. It's like we're going to try the whole Jewish thing. Oh, that didn't land well. So let's say economic recovery. Yeah, that'll work. Let's make everybody's lives better. Let's violate the Versailles Treaty every chance we can get by rearming our nation, again, violating the Versailles Treaty. And they managed to do that. Then, after the brainwashing was complete, now, since I rebuilt the society, the Jews are the enemy. They're going to take away everything that we just gave you. So everybody, right? The Jews are the enemy, right? And the electorate bought it. Same thing in America, powered by Russian propaganda. It's the brown-skinned people. It's immigrants taking your job. It's the woke media. It's the woke members of the military. It's feminists. It's the whole 9 yards. And it's, again, there's so many examples of history repeating itself, and we're living it now.
Yeah, I think Eastwood has a good perspective, an interesting perspective, but I also I think that's why we target women primarily, or that's why I think that what we have to do is, this is the largest part of the electorate that is being disenfranchised. Because I do agree. I think that one of the scary things about fascism, right, is the capital, right? Because there's got to be cover for billionaires. Yeah, if they have the capital to maybe make some people's lives better, to build infrastructure, to do things, but there is a large part of the electorate that is absolutely disenfranchised. Self-driving cars are not going to change the fact that women are being unalive, that we have maternal deserts, that women can't find an OBGYN, right? Like, these are the points we have to find out. But then I think it has to be a multi-pronged approach, because I also do think, like we say in advertising, keep it simple, stupid, and that is the bottom line. We got to have messaging. We've got to keep it simple, and we've got to just appeal to the working class, right? And that's why I like to say it so simply, like, hey, I don't care who you voted for in this conversation. All I want you to imagine is a world where, regardless of who we ever vote for, you can vote for the opposite of who I vote for all eternity, and we are still being robbed by the same people.
And
It's that simple.
we still continue to punch down. You know, it's part of it. And then again, that's by design by this Russian propaganda machine to literally go after. We don't mean to sound like a broken record here, but it's the victim blaming. It's the scapegoating. One of the tenets of fascism. We talk about that all the time. It's like you pick a marginalized community, and they are the threat. Meanwhile, your pockets are being picked.
Amen.
Right?
I mean, that's literally what is happening. And sure, could life get a little better, or can it be like, look over here at all this flashy stuff? I mean, yeah, that's what Elon Musk is essentially doing. But while doing that, there are people being othered. There are people being disenfranchised. Now, one of the largest cross sections in the electorate. Like, that's the beauty of the declining birth rate. Like, actually, this is something we haven't addressed. So I'll say this because I think it's important to address. Like, there are declining birth rates all across the world in the developed world. There was previously an idea in the developed world that birth rates were directly tied to the economy, meaning, hey, if families have the money, hey, Tanya, thank you for the heart. If families have enough money, they'll have as many children as they can. It's that simple. That's the reason family planning is tied to economics. But what we know now is, right, there are going to be the largest workforce. There's going to be more able-bodied workers in Africa than in the rest of the world combined by like 2040. What we've learned is economic success does not equal babies, right? Because there's a psychological component to it. If women don't believe they have a future, if people don't see that they have a purpose, why are they going to bring children into this society? And because of that, and Republicans continual underestimating of, as you disenfranchise people, as they see no future, there's a psychological effect on the birth rate. And I will say this, the repeal of Roe v. Wade, and you can look this up, it has increased the birth rate in states, right? Like Texas is it has increased the birth rate, but not by enough, right? So they need to disenfranchise women to have children. That's what they're trying to do. That's the crack, right? One of the largest cross sections of the electorate is now not just being othered, we're being objectified. We are no longer humans. One of my favorite Harvard studies, they showed men pictures of women they didn't know. Like, they would cycle through pictures of women men didn't know. And the part of the brain that would light up was the part that sees a thing, an object. And then they would start peppering in pictures of their women who were their cousins or their sister or their mother. And then the part of the brain would light up that says, oh, me, I recognize me, a human being, not an object, right? And that's the real problem right now, is the more that white women are othered, the more women are othered, the largest cross-section of the electorate continues to be objectified and othered. That is the biggest crack as I see it. Right. And we have to look for those cracks, and we have to get our finger in them, and we have to poke inside them. Right.
Well, wasn't it Mike Johnson who talked about that, Felice, about how he thought that, that anti-abortion legislation would help our population because then women could just become breeding factories, basically. We can repopulate, solves all of our problems. Social Security wouldn't have an issue. We'd have more workers.
Tell that to Japan. It's not working.
Exactly.
It's not. And all studies, like, there are other developed countries way farther along in the decline of their birth rate than us, and it's not working. And that's where these 4B movements, I like the, is it 4B 6T or 6B 4T? I think it's 6B 4T. Look it up. It was just banned in China. But yeah, I think we'll talk about it on our show tomorrow. But yeah, I think that is the crack. That's one of the main cracks. But these are the conversations we need to have. And when you have these ideas of, hey, I see a crack, I can identify a crack, a pain point in the American electorate, right? Because I do think John Eastwood's right in that he's saying there's a large cross section and the majority of them are straight white males who, regardless of who's president, their lives aren't going to change, right? They're not going to feel the pain at this point. But there are people who are starting to, right? As they edge closer to the expendables, like they're getting very uncomfortable. And those are the opportunities. Because I agree, like, I don't think, Gen Z males, like, they're not feeling the pain, right? They're not in a position, they're not getting uncomfortable. But I do think, and I think someone in the comments keeps saying this, there is a lower middle class, like this, that's who JD Vance appealed to, right? Hillbilly elegy.
The working
and
poor.
then we have, but the problem is we need to have a conversation about economics, right? With them. And that's complex. So how do we simplify that conversation, right? That is another thing I think we need to look at with our messaging is the numbers are on our side, right? Joe Biden did it better than anyone else in the G7. We recovered better from the pandemic. The data story of the economy, we win unequivocally, but how do you tell that story in a simple enough way? Because like we talked about at the beginning of the show, and we've kind of come full circle, this is not, America's not special. Incumbents in office in the last 4 years were displaced, right? Like, it's as simple as middle class, lower middle class, people in poverty just said, I just went through hell. You can try to explain to me how the supply chain works and that the price of eggs isn't Joe Biden's fault. I don't want to hear it. I went through hell. Like, I need something different. And it was that simple. So we have to come up with something very simple and straightforward that gives people hope and understanding that the future is in voting blue. I could go through congressional vote records. Oh, you need these programs to survive? Well, who votes, who funds the disaster relief fund? Not the Republicans. Who funds Social Security? Votes to protect Social Security? Not the Republicans, but how do we tell that message in a simple way?
Yeah, and to your point, and Daniela said this as well, it's irrelevant. Right. It almost becomes irrelevant when you become brainwashed. Again, we've said this before. You can take somebody to the concentration camp in the middle of the USSR and it wouldn't matter. They could be standing there faced with the reality of what we just told them, and it won't matter because that's the brainworm, the brain RFK pun there, no pun intended. The brainwashing of the electorate based on propaganda, misinformation. And I want to get back to this piece. I know you've got a lot of stuff on your outline. I'm happy to pivot to anything you want there. But I think this is a gentleman by the name of Tim Snyder. I know you know who he is. He's the preeminent expert on Russian propaganda and misinformation. This is an interview that he did a while back on an MSNBC, and I'll just play it for you because I think it's relevant. It speaks to exactly what we're talking about how these bot farms and how the propaganda machine starts a thread, starts a misinformation, disinformation propaganda campaign using all their various outlets, using Facebook, using social platforms, and then using talking heads that we found out recently that they've been paying. So this kind of speaks a little bit to it, and then we'll talk on the other side. Hold on. My bad.
The Republican Party. Our next guest, Yale history professor Timothy Snyder, testified about that on Wednesday in the House Oversight Committee.
If we follow Chinese propaganda about the ongoing Ukraine war, we notice a certain pattern, which is that the political warfare themes, which, as colleagues have quite rightly said, are meant to pass through us, have in fact done so. First, Ukrainians are Nazis, a Russian theme picked up by China, echoed on the House floor. Second, it's all about NATO enlargement, a Russian theme picked up by China. Third, Ukraine is corrupt, a Russian theme picked up by China, echoed on the House floor, echoed in the Senate by Senator Vance. Fourth, that democracies can't do anything about Ukraine, that it's all pointless, a Russian theme echoed by Chinese propaganda, picked up in House discussions. Fifth, we should pay attention to the border and not do anything about Ukraine, a Russian theme picked up by China, echoed in both chambers. Sixth, the Biden bribe, a Russian theme picked up and echoed by China, discussed in this very chamber.
Committee member Marjorie Taylor Greene, a member of the so-called Putin wing of the Republican Party, said this.
It's amazing to me that just in a few years' time, it's now considered misinformation to talk about the Nazis in Ukraine.
I'd like to thank the representative from Georgia by making clear with her comments and with her person that any discussion of political warfare has to include Russia, Ukraine, and America. She's just demonstrated that point, I think, very powerfully.
So it's funny, the examples that he gives, right, about NATO expansion, Biden bribes, the border, we should be funding the border and not the war in Ukraine, all that Russian propaganda. And then MTG, you know, in her beach blonde, bad built butch body self comes out and literally shares it in a hearing on the floor of Congress. J.D. Vance has referenced it. Mike Lawler, who was on the Intelligence Committee, admonished his colleagues for spreading Russian propaganda and misinformation. So this is what we're talking about, folks, right? Again, the propaganda machine, China, Russia, and other bad actors infiltrating not just the American psyche, not just the American populace and voters, but Congress. And then think about the people that are going to potentially be in Trump's cabinet. Thoughts?
Wait, can I play you a clip really quick? Because I
Please.
think you'll like this. Yeah, so this is who I absolutely love. A member of our intelligence community, Abigail Spanberger. She's a representative, I believe.
Love her.
Yeah, oh, she's a genius. This is her, like, let's tie this back, because we should talk about the cabinet. This is her addressing that issue. This woman's a genius, if you don't know her.
Then we have someone like Gabbard, who, as a sitting member of Congress, went to Syria and sat down with Bashar al-Assad shortly after he used chemical weapons against his own civilian population.
So, and I don't know, I covered this. There's a great article. There's there's articles all around. This is while we were engaged in military action against Syria. Mm-hmm. This is someone who had no business going to speak to a dictator that we were warring with, unauthorized. Mm-hmm. She showed up to talk to to one of the worst dictators like currently living on earth.
Which is out of step and out of alignment with U.S. policy, first and foremost. Out of step and out of alignment with the protocols that are in place to ensure that our ambassadors and our Secretary of State and all those who work in the diplomatic realm, let alone the defense realm, are not having sort of lone actors going to a foreign country, meeting with a authoritarian dictator who uses chemical weapons on his own people, and then comes home and says, oh, if the United States would just meet with him, surely we could get this all worked out. Then Gabbard is also someone who time and time again has trafficked in conspiracy theories, has used almost word for word the propaganda put out by the Kremlin and Russian state TV. And so whatever the motivation is behind it, whether it is truly aligned with her belief system, whether she thinks it's comical to get people like me and, and other folks riled up worrying about her being a national security risk, whatever the motivation is, it is misaligned with U.S. interests, and it is deeply, deeply dangerous. Because if she is willing to work against U.S. interests by going to Syria and meeting with Bashar al-Assad, if she is willing to work against U.S. interests by legitimizing the Kremlin's propaganda, what sort of untold damage could she have with the title of Director of National Intelligence if she's willing to do their bidding, right? That is the role that is responsible for ensuring what is in the presidential daily brief. Is she going to put Russian propaganda in the president's daily brief?
Yes.
If she's willing to put it out on Twitter to millions of Americans and the rest of the world, what would stop her from not including it in, the information and the advice that she's giving to the president? She has a very long history of just working against U.S. interests on the international scale, and she's an unserious, unfit, terrible candidate for this role, and one that it would be deeply, deeply dangerous.
Oh, I mean, wow. Abigail Spanberger for the win. Like, I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, that's the reality. So, like, I call it, these are true loyalty tests. Understand what Trump is doing. He has chosen the most unfit people, right? These people have nowhere, no, being in charge of 18 U.S. intelligence agencies are the deepest, darkest U.S. secrets. This woman is not unqualified. She's disqualified from
Agreed.
that. And Trump is saying, this is the first loyalty test of the Republicans, right? And Marjorie Taylor Greene said it last week out of her own mouth. She said, you can push these appointments through, or you will face Elon Musk, the most well-funded PAC in history. They're saying to the Republicans, this is your loyalty test. You prove that you will put unqualified propagandists, conspiracy theorists, people who've undermined our national security in there. You put grapists in there. You put SAers in there, or we will force you out.
Talk about the deep state.
Yeah, drain the swamp.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
Exactly.
Drain the swamp.
I mean, I'm glad you played that, but again, this our show today is about the influence of Russian propaganda on our electorate, and it's not just the voters, but it's now active members of Congress, it's potential appointees to cabinet positions. It's exactly, Coffee. It's scary, 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 scary times. There's so many other things on your outline, Felice. Is there anything else in particular that you wanted to jump into to talk about? Because everything on there is so great.
I mean, I do think the cabinet appointments are important, but
Sure.
I mean, if you just want to keep just touching on them, as some of those people like to touch on children, allegedly, we do not know. But again, I just want to say, I see this first round of appointments, right, as the most extreme. Like, this is an authoritarian dictator saying, prove your loyalty now, right? And if they will do this, they'll do anything. What won't they do at that point? Do you know what I'm saying?
That's a really good point. Everything's been about the loyalty test, right? Replacing Schedule F, replacing civil servants, the nonpartisan machine that makes a government go with loyalists. That's a Project 2025 mandate. We already learned about firing woke Democrats, whatever they are in the U.S. military, firing those people. The loyalty test now for approving these cabinet appointments. And apparently there's reporting that Mitch McConnell has come out within the last hours and said these recess appointments are not happening. I mean, he is still the Senate Majority Leader until January. So, well,
and I do think I don't think, this is my opinion, but me, I monitor like the MAGA sphere deeply and the Republican Party. That's why I'm on X all day. All I'm doing is monitoring, and I will say, Matt Gaetz, I don't think he can't get through.
No,
they are and I'm not talking about Democrats' opinions really don't matter at this point.
Correct.
I don't think Matt Gaetz can get through. Tulsi Gabbard would be the next one. I don't know. I think even alleged, he paid off someone who said that he raped them. Pete Hegseth, he might be able to get through, right? Like, there's more of an appetite for him, but I don't know. Matt Gaetz, I don't think can get through. And that was the loyalty. That is the biggest loyalty test, though. But let me tell you something Ron Filipkowski said, and you tell me, because it's chess, not checkers with Matt Gaetz. The thing that people should be worried about with Matt Gaetz, he's one of the most strategic. He is definitely he's moves ahead. I think that they know that there's a possibility Matt Gaetz won't get through. I think he had to leave the House, right? Because that report was coming out. Matt Gaetz had it is. They have an appetite for that. Matt Gaetz has enemies. They are going to that's what I'm trying to say. This has been coming for a long time. I'm not talking about Democrats. I'm trying to think of who actually said it. It might have been Wasserman Schultz, but someone said, "Don't worry about the Democrats." She's like, I mean, the Republicans despise Matt Gaetz.
Oh,
they will finish off Matt Gaetz on their own. Yeah, he made his bed with literally, and now must lie in it. But so he was going to leave anyways. But so think about this angle. Trump nominates him for AG. He doesn't get through. That report probably comes out. But on the right, it doesn't matter if you're an SA or a trafficker. It does not matter at this point. So he's now a martyr, right? MAGA's angry. He doesn't get confirmed. MAGA's like, oh, how dare you defy us? And now they've identified their targets, right?
Correct.
They're whoever it is, the 3, 4, 5 that dissent to get Matt Gaetz. Now MAGA has more targets to oust and put even more extreme people in. They have new people to target and other.
They get primaried in 2026. Yep.
Matt Gaetz makes a run for Florida governor, I predict. That's where Matt Gaetz' seat of power is, right? Like Matt Gaetz' daddy, that Matt Gaetz got that House seat from his dear daddy,
right,
who is very well connected in Florida. But I mean, because Matt Gaetz had to leave, you know, and the report probably will come out. I don't think anyone's going to care. I wish they cared. Think about how long they were like, Biden was on Epstein's plane. It's all going to come out. It's all going to come out. Well, it came out, you know, Trump was. Did they do anything about it?
It's a good point. The MAGA won't care, but I think it's not what comes out on the ethics report. I just think the Republicans in Congress just can't stand him and just don't want him around anymore. So again, if there is any good news in all of this, he won't be in Congress anymore. Either way, we won't see his face because he won't be in Congress,
and
it's
he's
like
a formidable foe.
Exactly, but and I always thought about a Florida Senate seat, but I think you're right about, because DeSantis proved that he wasn't MAGA enough for MAGA. So they're going to want somebody in there, and that's logical. That's very logical. He is despised, and he's also been someone who spread Russian propaganda. You know, when it talks about Ukraine, when he put Milley on blast during those same congressional hearings you were talking about before, right? About how, you know, how do we know that the money that we send to Ukraine is going to where it's supposed to? All these kinds of things, right? I mean, the entire machine.
Have you seen the clip of Matt Gaetz in a congressional hearing where he literally cites, like he's talking to, I think a CIA, a former U.S. intelligence agent, like questioning him, and he cites literally China's propaganda newspaper, and the guy's like, you're quoting a Chinese propaganda, a newspaper of Chinese propaganda. Like, yeah, Matt Gaetz is always spewing propaganda, and he does it well. And so I do think we need to get him out of Congress. I think, what's his name, Senate seat will go to, Marco Rubio's Senate seat will be open, and they're tapping Lara Trump.
I know. I know.
And isn't that an appointment? Is it a DeSantis appointment?
It is. The Senate seats are filled by the governor.
So Trump's probably going to bully DeSantis into appointing Lara.
That is so crazy. My gosh. This is our world now. I want to bring up Moth. Moth is going to do some Mon announcements for us. Thank you for being here, friend.
Good morning. How's everybody today?
Excellent.
Hi, Felice. I've been enjoying listening to you today as well. So yeah, let's get those fingers tapping, guys. We're at 284 right now. I know we can get up to 300. Let's get those shares going as well. What else do we got? Let's if you see the heart up there above Steve's head there, tap that. You can send a heart me. Liking, sharing, sending those heart me's, those all get us up onto the FYP. So let's get those going. I know we had a sub wave here a little bit ago. Looks like we might have missed it, but you can still sub. Join the Discord. You do not have to be a subscriber to join the Discord, but if you are a subscriber, you do get some pretty awesome benefits. We do some events for both non-subscribers and subscribers as well. If you are a subscriber, you also get a pretty cool discount in the merch store. So you can get shirts like the one that Steve's wearing, which is probably my favorite one. Exactly. That's the next one on my list. I definitely need that shirt. It's my favorite one for sure. But yeah, guys, let's just get those likes and those shares going.
Thank you, Moth. Appreciate you very much for doing that. Appreciate you.
Not a problem. Take care.
Have a lovely day.
I followed you back, Moth. Nice to meet you.
Moth
nice to meet you as well.
Member of our mod family. Okay, everybody, thank you again for this conversation today. How lucky we are to have Felice join us. And why don't you plug your show again? You said it's every Tuesdays. Why don't you take that opportunity
Well,
in case
yeah.
you have some new
Well,
folks that are here?
So I do a clip show every day, like where I go through the news and things using the wonderful tools of TikTok Studio. That's every day. It's 11. I was trying to keep it under 2 hours, but there's so much to talk about lately. So it's about 2 hours and 30 minutes. It's like, let's just say 11 to 2, or on the East Coast. Why can't my brain work? 2 to 5.
Right.
And then tomorrow, I'm starting a show with Mandy and Danny, Potty Mouth Pollyanna. She's absolutely amazing, focuses on women's issues. And Danielle, who is a PhD, who actually is runs research teams, does clinicals, and literally focuses on women's issues, speaks all around the world on them, specifically on women's bodily autonomy. We're going to be focusing on those issues. And from that show, hopefully, through Fee, who just started working with me and is absolutely amazing, we're going to create, and I want to also work with Facts on this, to have more opportunities for people to get involved in volunteering, activism, grassroots activism. Because, and I'll say this to you, and it's just something to think about, like, we all feel sort of wildly out of control, or like, oh, this is dark. I can report on the news, or I can listen to the news. I can educate myself, which is good. Education, we need to be educated. We need to know what's going on. We can't hide our heads in the sand. But what can I do? And I was listening, I can't remember who I was listening to speak about this, but it was basically someone saying, look what the Republican Party did and what they were successful at, right? After the Bush era, George W. Bush era, there was all these disasters in Iraq. There was all these questions about WMDs, and the party was experiencing a bad time, right? During the Obama years. And what did they do? They went hyper local, hyper grassroots, and that's what I think we all need to look at. Like, I happen to be in the swing state of Arizona, but we need to look at on the hyper local activism and transforming that. Because as for me in a swing state, I worked on the election. I canvassed, I knocked on doors. I was a creator for Kamala. I was in that program. I live streamed campaign events. I did all the things. But the way we campaigned, knocking on doors is over. You know what I mean? We need to work on, how do we reach the electorate in new ways, right? And I think that's a problem you and I should look at. Like, how can we get hyper local, encourage people to reach the electorate? Because canvassing, phone calls, people aren't answering their phones. I phone banked.
Yeah, we've all done
I
it.
talked to like 3 people who would listen,
I know.
So,
it's and something you said, and something Daniela said too, it's about how, it's always a challenge when you're having conversations about women's rights to their body and saying that, men shouldn't be speaking out on that topic. And I've always tried to reserve space for women to have that conversation because, I can't bear children, but I do think it's important to have the voices of men in those spaces, especially those that are, accomplices in the fight, right? I don't use allyship. I use accomplice just because it requires.
I do like that word. I like it.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. So I want to encourage. Like we did a live on. It was very controversial because the topic was white men's voices matter, and people were like, "What the hell are you talking about? You're the pinnacle of society." And what I meant by that was there are advocates, there are people, there are accomplices out there that do defend women's rights, that do speak up for marginalized groups, and sometimes we don't feel like there's an opportunity for us to speak up. But if we're going to flip this script, if we're going to change this narrative, if we're going to push back against Russian propaganda, we're going to push back against hateful rhetoric and scapegoating and all these assaults, figuratively and literally on marginalized groups, it's going to take all of us that are in the fight. So, yes.
I'm getting an idea in real time. What do you think of it? Like, because I think this is a conversation that needs to happen. Because I'm in a group chat with Danny and Mandy, and I like women's frustration. I think the way I put it is, I think, like, when it's your rights, when it's your bodily autonomy, when you're next up on the chopping block, there's this desperate feeling like it doesn't matter if women have 2 full-time jobs, if we're exhausted, whatever it is, we fight because we're next up to be unalived. Like, we have no choice. And I think maybe the conversation we could have publicly as a couple men, a couple women, is about that conversation of, I know sometimes women can be frustrated. It seems, if you were next up to be unalived, right? How would you be acting differently, right? Like, maybe from complete apathy to, like there's different levels of apathy, I think, for men that are frustrating to women. And like, I think we should have this like open conversations with allies of like, how do we bridge that gap? Like, how do we feel like we're all in this together and working together? Maybe we have an open conversation about that.
I like that. I mean, I think to your point, I've had this conversation recently when I was talking to men prior to the election about their choice to vote for, if they asked if they have daughters and they voted for Trump. And I said, okay, would you, as a hashtag girl dad, would you do anything for your daughter? And they said, yes. Would you give them your blood?
Amen.
Of course I would. Would you give them your arm? Of course I would. Would you throw yourself in front of a bus? Of course I would. Would you give them your vote? Well, no, I can't do that. So it's like,
Exactly.
it's that emotional
Versions
connection.
of that.
Exactly. That's why I think you and I agree that I think moms, white women in particular, may be a more influential group because they're the ones, like you say, they're the ones that are connected to their family, perhaps deeper on a different level. Mama's baby boy, my baby boy can't be following Donald Trump. My baby boy can't be supporting sexual assaulters. My baby boy can't be perpetuating the myth that misogyny and toxic masculinity is the way to go. I'm hoping that group is a group that we can get. And it may not just be women that can reach that group. It may be gray-haired, bearded men like me as part of those conversations to say, my mother was the most influential person in my life. Without question, no doubt about it. I lost her way too young. She was the most influential person in my life. And there's a lot of other men out there that would say the exact same thing. So if that were true, then let's let their mothers influence them. Let's help their mothers come up with the tools to help remind their boys and their girls as to what's at stake. And I don't know if that happens enough.
And turn the support, right? Like the agreement, like the allyship into action as well, right? Like and give a path to do that. The tools, the path to do that. Like, yeah, I agree with you. I think there are a lot of men out there, I think, who agree, who support women, who have daughters, who are scared, who want to do something, and we need to be able to openly have that conversation. And with women, like, men need to say, how do you need to be supported? And we need to because we're exhausted, and I think we need to accept the help as well.
Yeah, and I think what we've learned from this past election is that Black women are going to be like, we're done. We've showed up every single time you've asked us that you need our help in defending democracy.
Black women are done.
I don't blame them. I really don't. I just don't blame them.
We saw it with the fall of Roe, right?
Absolutely.
Like it was all of a sudden white women were like, help us. What do we do? They're hurting us. And Black women were like, no, we've been community organizing this. We've been fighting. We've been doing, this is what we've been doing, And it's like, yeah. So I mean, yeah, Black women are the ultimate community organizers, the ultimate grassroots, like powerhouses. And yeah, they're tired, as well they should be.
And they're subjected to, and sadly, Black women are then subjected to our society being so heavily influenced with Russian propaganda to stay on theme. Again, it's about the superiority of the white man in society. Cage doesn't need me to say that; she knows. but that's again, if there's a way to push back, again, we have to get our messaging better, more concise, more direct, more specific, as part of the 3-word. Again, what's it called? Leading language? I forget what it's called, but. Anyway, Cage, thanks for being here. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Felice. I watch you all the time. I think you're fantastic.
Amazing. Let me follow you. Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Let me just say this. One of the resources that I would entreat people to read, because I'm personally the Red Cross now, and Steve and I have had this conversation. I'm not out of the fight. I'm just helping with the wounded now because I'm tired. Yeah. I'm 55 and I'm exhausted. But I would challenge everybody to get the book, The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Okay. This book goes over some of the things that were used against people in this election. Okay. One of the laws of power that stands out to me is court attention at all costs. That's law number 6. We saw that with the MAGAs. We saw that with the news. He got so much attention. It was like, why are we focusing on 45 all the time? We're focusing on every outlandish thing he's doing, And then law number 6, learn how to keep people dependent on you. Okay. Crush your enemy totally. Keep others suspended in terror. Cultivate an air of unpredictability. Does this sound familiar to everybody? I highly recommend, because I am almost finished this book. And I mean, I got to tell you, you'll need a shower after you read each chapter. It's so slimy, but it really helped me to understand what we were up against, because a lot of these laws were being used during this election cycle. And people don't understand that some of the things that were being done are part of these. I would have to say almost every single law was used in this election. I highly recommend this book, because a lot of people don't realize how they're being manipulated with these power laws. And what's scary to me is, as a African American woman, one of the things that we always say is we can't be fooled by the bots for the most part, because this has been done against us for centuries. Yeah. So we know the game. And so I highly recommend that everyone read this book. You will have a better chance of getting people to get galvanized out there, because once they know the proverbial tricks of the trade, and I'm not talking about MAGA, Miss Cookies, I'm talking about our base. They need to know how these things are being used against us. I mean, it's just one of the ones that Felice was talking about, the pain points, is actually Law 33. Discover each man's thumbscrew. These are things that we can read about, and we can understand how they are using these laws. Yes, the laws of power. This is how people can learn how not to be manipulated.
I put it in the comments. Guys, I wrote it and put it in the comments. If you can't see it, scroll up.
We'll post it in our Discord too.
Yes. And then Law 31 is control the options, get others, plan all the way to the end, play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following. Law 27. Everybody on this live needs to read this book. This book is so dangerous, they do not allow it in penitentiaries. Okay. So if it's that dangerous, we all need to be abreast of what's going on, so that we can understand when this is happening. And so, people, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, so Cage, I know you, and we've had many great conversations. Everybody, please keep tapping and sharing. Please make sure that we're gifting Felice and gifting Cage. I know you're on the Red Cross side. I get that now, right? I understand that. But so the conversation that Felice and I had just prior to you joining, Cage, was like, I'll ask you, do you want white men as part of this fight? Because, you know, I don't blame Black women for saying, I'm done. I am done. So do you want white men as part of this fight?
At this point, there's no other option. I'm going to be honest. We are to the point where, and I'm going to tell you from my personal perspective, I can't speak for anybody but me. I feel so incredibly betrayed by all the people who went out and claimed that they were going to vote this way, that went out and marched, petitioned, went to town meetings, were on Zoom calls. It's kind of like, and I did a video on this. I talked about how, you know, we've seen this for 100 years. The suffrage movement, and then again during the civil rights movement, and then again during the women's 70s movement, and then 2 years ago, and then this past election. It's to the point now where if you think our trust was eroded before, it's gone. I mean, we don't trust anything anymore, because we're not looking at people's words and actions. We're talking about patterns. I did a post 2 years ago right here on TikTok about we're looking at historical patterns. So at this point, somebody has to fill the void that we are leaving behind, because if someone doesn't, all of us are going to be in the same boat. Now, as a Black woman, I'm always going to be down there with Indigenous women. We're always going to be at the lowest part of the cast. We understand this until things change. But if white men do not get a grip, you're going to start to find out that the lines between race and class will start to become blurred for those who are not rich. And this is what people are not understanding. We see this because this is what we've been subjected to, believe it or not. And this is going to sound strange to a lot of people. We as marginalized communities already live under an authoritarian and dictatorship type of system. People
Sure.
don't get that. They don't understand. We are trying to save you all from this so this doesn't become so widespread that then no one can get out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cage, I always appreciate your perspective on things, and I think thanks for being here. And I think what you said, I think, is relevant. That everybody who is in opposition to this, needs to prove it. So less talking about it, more being about it. But we all need to be in accomplice ship to fight back against this BS, because no one group, it's been proven. There's one of the faults of the left is there's a lot of pearl clutching, and a lot of, if it's not perfect, you sacrifice the good in the quest for perfection. And that's kind of what we saw in this past election. But thank you for jumping in today, my friend. I appreciate
Can
you.
I add one more thing real quick? And
Sure.
This is something, and I'm landing this plane. Steve, you and I have talked about this before. We are the blueprint, everybody. What they do to us, they know works, and then they implement it with everybody. You need to think about that. For those of you who are sitting there on the fence, afraid, what they've done to us, they will do to you.
So well said. Thanks, Cage, as always. I appreciate you. See you later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Nice to meet you.
She's awesome.
Wait, what did you just said something and I wanted, God, what did you say? Oh yeah, the pearl clutching on the left. And you said something that kind of rhymed. I can't remember what the exact words were, but I agree. I mean, I think like it's called coalition, right? Like I wish we lived in a Scandinavian democracy. I wish we had many political parties. Everyone could get in where they fit in, and then we could join together to form coalitions, right? Like that would be ideal, but unfortunately American politics doesn't work that way.
Yeah, like in the quest for perfection, we ignore the good, or we miss the good in the quest for perfection.
Well, yeah, or just like the pearl clutching or the purity testing on the left,
Right.
like there's
Right.
always this, well, that they're not left enough to be left. Like, I don't agree with them. Or the Democratic Party, like, because I don't agree with the moderates, so I'm not voting. Like we have seen now in this election what happens. I watched people go around for months on the internet, leftist creators on TikTok for months, go in and out of live saying, I'm not voting for Kamala. I don't like the Democrats. I'm not voting for Kamala. And particularly identifying the Palestinian G side as one. Well, that was one, let's say that was one of the threads I heard the most, I think is fair to say, because people had many different reasons, but that was a thread I heard the most. Like, I encourage anyone who was on that BS to really do research. If you are participating in the American supply chain, if you are living in the suburbs, you're complicit in G side. Like, if you, like, that's why I disappeared into South America.
Yeah.
Like, if you're under the impression there's one G side going on, then you are underinformed, right? And I'm going to show this on my show today. I won't even play it, but there's a video of our new Secretary of State, right? I can't tell you the leftist I heard saying Anthony Blinken is the devil. I don't like Anthony Blinken either. I'm left of left. I am a stone's throw from communist. Like, you
are, yeah.
Like, but that does not matter. Like, how you consolidate power, how we move forward, how we stop the onset of authoritarianism is by voting together. I just encourage everyone to watch, let's say, Ro Khanna or Bernie Sanders, right? Like, you have to win a general election, the candidate has to move back to the middle. It's disgusting. I don't like to watch it. I don't like to hear it. But you have to appeal to the middle. Change happens in the middle, right? And if we continue on the left to let that be disqualifying, when a candidate in the general election starts moving and appealing to the moderates that now we no longer have your vote, we will continue to lose elections. Like, that's what I need people to see. And Marco Rubio in the halls of Congress, I'll play this on my show later, but they caught, someone was asking him and saying, oh, what are you going to do for the Palestinians? And he said, are you recording? I want people to hear this. I want people to hear this. I'm not doing anything. He's like, if Palestinians are unalived, it's Hamas's fault. Like, if you think the Palestinians were in a bad situation, right? And it's also for the fake libertarians on the right who were into the no new wars. Trump's going to de-escalate. They are not. Trump put a neocon warmonger and as Secretary of State who said yesterday, I want people to hear this. Any unalivings, that's not on the U.S. And we're going to continue supporting Israel and whatever they want to do, basically. And then on top of that, I don't know if you guys know Mike Huckabee, who's now like ambassador to Israel. I mean, he is basically at the final solution for the Palestinians. I mean, that's how extreme that man is. So by apathy, by saying, I don't like what the Democratic Party has done, I'm not voting, right? And also by saying that publicly, did you influence anyone else? I don't know, but we're at a situation now where we've lost the popular vote. I don't like voting for the lesser of two evils either. I'm an idealist. I am a true leftist / communist. I hate the American empire as much as anyone else, I promise. But what we have to realize is the only way to pull this country back left is through incremental change.
You know, it's funny. I say that a lot. I'm probably not as far left as you, but close. You know, I would, and I had this joke with Erica who came up earlier about how I consider myself a progressive, and a progressive in American politics is status quo in the rest of the world because they have the things that Americans progressives have to ask for, like universal health care, like, you know, background checks on firearms, like raising minimum wage, like paying teachers more, like overfunding public education. And you're right. And sadly, the progressive voice in America seems like it's loud because we talk about all these things that are so important for our society, again, like universal health care. But the moderates make the machine run. It's the people in the middle on both sides of the political spectrum. Our country is center right politically. We have to accept that. Yeah. That's just who we are.
And moving right.
And moving further right. Exactly. And moving further right. So to claw that.
I hate it as much as everyone else. I hate it.
Me too.
But how do we move 1 inch to the left? How?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Exactly. And it doesn't take much because the margins are still slim in these elections, especially in those swing states. I'm tired of having every single election come down to the 7 swing states. But that's the circumstance that we're in. And I was hopeful that this last election, again, Russian propaganda, because they kept telling us who to hate. I was hopeful that this last election, there was going to be a chance to expand the map. I bought into the whole Iowa poll that came out 5 days before the election. I bought into the fact.
Can I talk to you? Can I just ask you, did you see what Trump posted last night about that? No. This is true authoritarianism. Like, I just want to say, so what's her name? It's not Seville. I have it in today's Monday outline. It's like the top of the clips. I'll pull it up. What's her name? The woman, she's a famous pollster. She's one of them here.
The woman from Iowa?
She's it's not Seeger. It starts with an S. The woman whose poll that is. She's a famous pollster.
Yeah.
Here, let me scroll down.
I'm sure our chat will come up with it. I got it. J.N. Selzer.
It's
Selzer.
Thank you, Ann Selzer. Trump last night on social media called for an investigation into her.
Of course.
Says she's an op. Of course. Because and that poll was like she needs to be investigated. I mean, this is true. This is fascism. Here we go. And Ruth Ben-Ghiat, who's my favorite historian from NYU, she wrote the Strongman book about authoritarianism. Ruth Ben-Ghiat was commenting on it. She said, "Welcome to the authoritarian weaponization of the state and waste of taxpayer money on vanity crusades. Anyone who seems to criticize the leader or produce results that he does not like must be investigated." This is what Trump wrote yesterday. A totally fake poll that caused great distrust and uncertainty at a very critical time. She knew exactly what she was doing. Thank you to the great people of Iowa for giving me such a record-breaking vote, despite possible election fraud by Ann Selzer and the now discredited newspaper for which she works. An investigation is fully called for. I wonder where we are on the list.
Well, I know. I mean, and again, history repeating itself, right? Here it is. I mean, it's so unhinged. You have one pollster that comes out with what they saw in the electorate. You know, I think all these mistakes that were made were women underrepresented. Were we not getting enough insight as to whether or not women were going to show up at the polls? And you did a really great breakdown last week about how the gap is not as big as people want to think it is. It's not this 15 million votes. It's more like 2 million, roughly speaking, or whatever the number is.
It's like going to be like 2.7 or something. Yeah.
Yeah. By the time it's all counted, right? It's something like that, under 3 million votes, which again speaks to the rise of authoritarianism. And this is the world that we live in now. And you mentioned this earlier, and I'm glad you brought this up. Incumbents in power lost in 2024 and in 2023. So the party that was in power governing during COVID have all lost. And that's not something we can ignore. Yeah.
Exactly.
We can't ignore that because that's the kitchen table politics, right? We have a joke in our community. That's the price for a gallon of eggs. That's what.
Anytime we say kitchen table politics, now I just picture Katie Britt at that table after the State of the Union. Do you remember? That was the scariest thing I've ever. The rebuttal to the State of the Union, Senator Katie Britt. She was in her kitchen in where is she from? Alabama. That was one of the most disturbing rebuttals to the State of the Union I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's like she embraced The Handmaid's Tale in a strange way, right?
I was did they? Yeah, it was like a robot had taken her over.
Yeah, but
that was our trad wife future.
Exactly. So this is kind of the whole point. And once again, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but this goes back to Russian propaganda. This is the ability for them to manipulate the electorate, thinking that there is some deep state, whether it be Pizzagate, whether it be adrenochrome, whether you name it, all rooted in anti-Semitism, all rooted in anti-Muslim rhetoric, xenophobia, whatever it might be. These are all the things that have influenced the electorate. And now we've got to claw it back, because I used to think prior to this election, and I still do think this way, that's the idealist in me, that there are more people in our country that do believe in the preservation of human rights, that do believe in women's rights to their body, that do believe in overfunding public education. They just didn't show up to vote. That's the worst part. And whether that's the pearl clutching on the left or the entitlement that falls to the left, not that the right doesn't have it as well, but they just didn't show up to vote. So that's this challenge that we now face, right?
Yeah, and the projections, and I think that's one of the projections of that, like you're saying, the numbers I was going through of where we're projected to end up when the votes are actually counted, is that Trump actually, it's not so much that Trump had some huge turnout. Like he had, so around the same turnout he had last time. He benefited most from the non-turnout. Like that's what it was. It wasn't that he had some great turnout. He benefited from people staying home. And that's what we need to think about. Like, how are we going to motivate people? And I talk about this. I'll say this online for the first time. I said this to many people behind the scenes on election day and before election day. I didn't think that we were going to win Arizona. I was deeply entrenched in that campaign. I was on the trail. What I thought to myself is, hopefully it's different in Pennsylvania. Hopefully it's different in Michigan. Hopefully it's different, because there was a disconnect that I felt like I could feel. People weren't resonating. And I think that's a nuanced answer. I think there's many answers as to why. But yeah, psychosocially, there's studies. There's a long way from supporting a candidate, from saying, I support Kamala Harris, from saying, I registered to vote for Kamala Harris, and showing up at the polls. There is a huge gap between those two things. And that's what we have to think about. What do we change to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I mean, and this is another example of the danger that Russian propaganda has done to our society, because we do know that Russia, we do know that Russia's interfered with numerous elections. We do know that the Mueller report provided a lot of that evidence. So they were able to sow doubt in the election. And people on the left thought, well, the doubt was going to come from MAGA voters when Trump lost again. Lo and behold, he wins the election. And now people on the left are now saying, there's election interference. It's the Starlink satellites, even though the voting machines are not connected to the internet. They're not connected. So it's all this kind of stuff.
I didn't even hear that one. I never.
Oh yeah.
I didn't hear that until right now.
Oh yeah.
I didn't even know.
Oh yeah. I had to slap down last week a few people that were just going down that conspiracy roll, and I reminded people it's facts still matter, not rumors still matter, not innuendo, not supposition. It's so until we have evidence of actual, criminality, nefarious activities, what it might be, then we can talk about it. But this is another example of sowing doubt in the American electorate. Again, the demoralization, civil unrest, right? All these crises, all this kind of stuff, it's happening right in front of us. Right in front of us.
Think about we were watching the richest man in America buy the most prolific social media news platform. In the world, buy the most prolific news media platform, use it to spread propaganda, misinformation, allow foreign agents to do the same on that platform, and spend at the end what was he spending? Was it he's giving out $1 million a day,
bucks.
even in swing states,
Just buying votes,
outside
no
of what
big
the
deal.
PAC is spending? Yeah, and we watched that in real time. We still don't have the final campaign finance reports. We won't know until next quarter, when the final campaign finance reports come out, what Elon Musk was really even doing. So I think that it's a nuanced conversation, but we were up against a lot. Like, we truly were. And I see it as, like, here's, as far as the blue and on, like, the conspiracy stuff, I'll say this is my positive look on it, or when I thought about it a lot, like, why is this happening? I think that it's the stages of grief, right? Especially for women, because women are in a situation where lives are on the line, right? So, and when you're going through the stages of grief, it can't be real. It must be a conspiracy. That's the bargaining stage.
Right.
You're in complete disbelief, and you are just like, no, this can't be real. There has to be some other explanation, right? So I don't think it's it's natural human behavior, but like, what I know is me spending time on that stuff will not change anything, right? Like I said, I was raised by a malignant narcissist. I have a lifetime of experience resisting a malignant narcissist, and I know how to do it. And it's not to dwell on the past. It's not to dwell on what happened yesterday, because I know I have nothing to do with outcome determinative fraud. I don't own a consulting firm that can pour over data. I'll leave that to the people who do, and I'm going to focus on what's next. I'm going to focus on what I can control and building a resistance and giving women hope, at an outlet to have conversations and to find these cracks, when women have these moments of, wait, what's going on? And be there, in those moments.
I just got a notification that I got to do a little capitalisming. So I need to end a little early today. But before we do, I want to thank you immensely for being here. This is great. So if you want to come back and do this again, I would love to have it. And I know the audience reacted very strongly to having you here today. So as we like to do, a tradition around here is anybody who's on the panel, as we wind down the show, last words. So what are your last words for the day today, Felice?
Okay, so I'll be doing news show in a couple hours at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Come join if you want to learn the latest of what happened over the weekend with MAGA. I think knowledge is power, so that's my goal, is to give people knowledge. Also, if you come, you can join we'll get you a link to join the Discord. All of the clips and all of the articles, all the collateral I put together, I put in the Discord. Because I think the gift I can give people as a teacher is arm people with the truth and give people peace of mind. So that's the goal. If you're a woman or an ally, like, men are absolutely welcome, and we want you, please come tomorrow to Mandy and Danny and I first show. It's a working title, but we're thinking something like maybe The Broadcast. Get it?
Oh, I love that. That's awesome.
I know, or the F word, like feminism. I don't know. We play around with a lot of
them
titles.
both.
There's so many funny. Yeah, there's so many funny ones. I don't know, but we're thinking about it. Come tomorrow. Let's see. It's 12 p.m. Central Time, so that's 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. If you want to be part of that, and my goal is just to figure out, and for you and I to work together as much as possible as well. I immensely enjoyed this. Like, I love your brain. I've told you this a million times, but
Same.
I think that this is, we have a lot of synergy here and a lot of opportunities to grow and change and work together. So I hope we can in the future. And just like you guys appreciate me, like, these communities, you guys are my family, right? Like, I never had a family until TikTok. So I'm not going to cry, but I appreciate you guys.
Don't cry. We appreciate you too. And again, please, if you don't follow Felice, first of all, what the hell's wrong with you? I'm sure everybody here does. We'll be looking for her clip show later. We'll be looking for her awesome, whatever you're going to brand it. I love the broadcast. I think that's think that's great. I love that one.
I know, funny.
Grab them by the news, grab them by the broadcast or something like that.
Oh,
by the
wait,
way,
you know what Danny came up with? Pegging the patriarchy. I'm
Oh, that's
sorry, I shouldn't have
that's fabulous. Yeah, that's been going around a lot. I know Kristen talks about that quite a bit. Killshot Kristen, she talks about that. We're gonna rate our friend Doug. So Doug is live. You guys know Dougie. Everybody go check out Doug. We're gonna rate him. But I want to thank everybody for being here. And again, a cautionary tale, right? We talk about Russian propaganda because it's really, really important. You see it every single day. Hopefully, what you learned from us today is just an example of what it is that we're talking about and why it's so important to be on the lookout for it. And white women in particular, we're looking at you. We really see you as an opportunity to help us, the collective us, push back against some of this stuff so that we can influence the next generation, because we know Gen Z did not show up at this election. I'm not surprised by that. A lot of loud voices, a lot of activism, but when the time came, they didn't show up. And we know that young men, by and large, tend to lean right. Our world is becoming more radicalized. Our world is leaning more right. And if we want to stand for the things that truly matter, human rights, the preservation of democracy, free thought, women's rights to their body, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, now's the time. We can't wait. Thank you, mods. Thank you, Felice. It's been an honor. I'm sure I'll see you later. And then everybody, if not, I'll see you back here tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Have a great